And as long as Israel has the unconditional support of the American government, specifically President Trump and Congress, then I suspect the dying will continue, the killing will continue.
So recently, Douglas Macgregor went on Judge Napolitano's podcast to slam the U.S. government for backing Israel's atrocities in Gaza. He gets into what the political pressures behind this are. Is there anything that will disrupt that to an extent? And what does this mean for the Trump administration and U.S. foreign policy in general? Let's get his take on this. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
President Trump is a true believer in bullying. And the age of bullying, of course, was the age of imperialism. That's when you would sail your gunboat in and threaten the Sultan of Zanzibar that if he didn't open his harbor to your access and didn't allow you to come in and control his markets, that you would destroy him. I think Trump is locked into that paradigm. That's over. The age of imperialism is completely, unalterably dead. The countries that are joining BRICS, who are rushing into the arms of BRICS, are people that have had lots of experience with colonialism and don't want to have any more. So he's the best advertisement, I think, that we probably have ever seen for BRICS.
Yeah, maybe that works in the New York real estate market, but it doesn't seem to be working in any way when it comes to both theaters in Ukraine and Israel, certainly so. It doesn't seem to be securing peace in any of those areas, and neither does more secondary tariffs, more bankrolling genocide, more pumping in money to Zelensky's coffers, and more funding the military-industrial complex.
And he continues to finance genocide and starvation in Gaza.
Well, he does. And I think that that's just something we have to understand, that there are a lot of people in the United States, because I run into them on a pretty frequent basis, who just tell me flat out they could care less how many people die in Gaza. And when you ask them why, well, these are Muslim Arabs, they're terrible people. I think that the decades of systematic propaganda pumped into us through the mainstream media to defame, destroy, degrade Arabs in general has been very effective. And so at this point, I'm not surprised that he still has enormous support inside the United States, at least inside his base, for his support of mass murder and expulsion of people in Gaza. Now, how much longer will this go on? I don't know. But how often do you see film footage, pictures, and listen to eyewitness testimony from people in the mainstream media on what's happening in Gaza? I don't think very much. And Americans still rely on mainstream media. The other thing is that my generation of boomers could care less. They just have a very negative picture. And look, I'm not here to defend Islam. I'm not by any means saying I think the world should all embrace Islam. I'm simply saying that I oppose this sort of thing everywhere that it happens. I would oppose the mass murder of Chinese by Japanese in Shanghai. I would oppose the mass murder of any people anywhere, and then the systematic removal of them from their homes where they have lived for thousands of years.
Amen. That needs to be said more. And let's just be real. He's just generalizing about the boomer thing. There are exceptions, because I know I'm going to get people in the comments saying, I'm a boomer and I don't like what Israel's doing. I get it. Your exception doesn't prove the general rule. And that's what demographics show us, that young people more and more are turning against Israel. But he's absolutely right. It is people in the United States that have been propagandized their entire lives to this Israel first Zionist notion that Israel's just minding its own business. It's the only democracy in the region. Well, not if you're born in Gaza and can't vote in those elections and are treated as a second-class citizen at best, by the way, if they don't kill you first. And, that it's just defending itself. No, it's trying to expand its borders, consummate a genocide, draw the U.S. into a war versus Iran for regime change, etc. So yeah, people have been propagandized. I hate to see that mentality of not caring about people dying because they're Arabs. But even if that's your mentality, why do you need the U.S. to bankroll the killing of Arabs and side with Israel at all costs? That's what I'll never understand, even among some of the pro-Israel crowd that, doesn't care one way or another. Well, you're bankrolling it, so your partiality is that you do care, or you're not willing to stand up against bankrolling it.
This is just outrageous and unacceptable. But that's not being driven home here in the country, despite the good work of Aaron Mate and Max Blumenthal, as you know.
Yes, I'm sorry to say that I agree with you. Neither you nor I, nor many people watching us, are fans of the British government, particularly the current British government. But this is a very articulate condemnation of the Israelis in the presence of their monomaniacal UN ambassador by the UK ambassador. This is yesterday in New York City. Chris, cut number 7.
The IPC's confirmation of famine in Gaza City marks the first officially recorded famine in modern history in the Middle East. It is entirely man-made and, as my Foreign Secretary has said, it is a moral outrage. Over 100 children in Gaza have died of malnutrition, while food is sitting at Gaza's borders. I have 2 clear messages for Israel. Immediately lift restrictions and allow food, medical supplies and fuel to reach those in desperate need in line with international humanitarian law. Israel's attack on Nasser Hospital this weekend, killing civilians, health workers and journalists, is appalling. A ceasefire remains the best way to secure the release of all the remaining hostages. The Israeli government's plan to expand military operations in Gaza will only put them in further danger.
By the way, that's the argument that the IDF chief is making right now, that, the hostages will die if we occupy Gaza, and it's going to drag Israel into a black hole. That's what Zamir is saying right now, pushing back against this madness. There are a few dissenting voices, even in Netanyahu's, atmosphere. Yair Golan and Ehud Olmert are of the same caliber. And this is within Israel. You never hear about dissenting views within Israel toward Netanyahu, but that is true.
We condemn this decision and urge Israel to change course. Israel's decision to approve plans for settlement construction in the E1 area in the West Bank, if implemented, would be a flagrant breach of international law, and it will take us further away from peace.
Nicely and articulately said, but nobody will do anything about it.
Well, when we say nobody, we need to understand that it all is contingent on what we do.
Right.
And as long as Israel has the unconditional support of the American government, specifically President Trump and Congress, then I suspect the dying will continue, the killing will continue without interruption. And we're heavily invested in all of this because we're part of a larger strategy in the region to balkanize and destroy Iran, to essentially turn Iran into some version of Syria, to ultimately get control of the oil and gas regions.
Yeah, all this is true. All of this is in accordance with the Greater Israel Project. They want to destabilize Lebanon and Iran in the same way that Syria was destabilized, so they can lay claim to a lot of that territory. Right now, you have some voices in Israel talking about renewing the war versus Iran and using Lebanon's military as a proxy to do that. The aim is, but there's 2 aims there, both to destabilize Iran and to break Lebanon apart in a civil war. So he's right. The Israeli influence in our government is palpable. There's nothing that seems to be stopping it now. I hate to say that. I wish I could say otherwise. But in the short term, the only thing I think that can inhibit it to a small degree is the midterms. If the Democrats are actual more anti-Israeli dissidents and populists take over, it won't be a good solution for every realm of politics, but Democrats are much more opposed to this than Republicans. AIPAC will still be there, and nothing will change in the grand scheme until long term, when many of the older people die and the younger people displace them in our government, which are more anti-Israel. But largely I agree with Macgregor here.
As a means, we think, of breaking up BRICS, destroying the One Belt, One Road project that runs from Iran up into Central Asia and Russia. I mean, all of this is bound up together. None of this should be seen in isolation. It is nice to see the British government finally come around. I wish more would in Europe, But the interesting part is that this British government's not likely to last very long.
Right.
And you have a similar situation in Germany right now. The German government is following the British example, trying to suppress free speech and erase the existence in the political arena of the alternative for Germany. To his credit, Vice President Vance has spoken on this subject and been very critical of what the British and the Germans and others are doing.
Well, meanwhile, Vance has lent his hand and his political support to cracking down on free speech if it targets American Jews. They just want to have DEI carve-outs against anti-Semitism, curtailing free speech for that. And sorry, it doesn't work that way. If you really believe in free speech, you believe in any kind of speech, including hate speech and derogatory speech, and let that hate speech and derogatory speech be rebutted with true speech if that's your view. But instead, you can get these Republicans to enact a right-wing flavor of hate speech laws. We're seeing that in the American states. Both Georgia and I think Arizona rewrote their hate speech codes recently to conflate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, and it's absurd. So the Republican Party's hands are not clean when it comes to free speech here.
That's a very good thing. Will it make any difference? I don't know.
Hasn't Trump just fallen totally in line with the policies of Joe Biden with respect to Gaza?
Yes, I think so. And that's what we witnessed in his first term, that over time, he came in with a very fresh perspective, fresh ideas, determined to do something. The Russiagate hoax obviously hamstrung him at the time, but ultimately he leaves office not accomplishing any of the things that he thought were really important. I think we're seeing that again. Now, in fairness, he has tried very hard on the border with regard to illegal immigration and the drug trafficking. He now seems to be committed, or at least interested in potentially another front in the war down in Venezuela. I don't think that's the right solution for what we don't like about Venezuela.
Yeah, they're flirting with regime change in Venezuela while all this is going on, while U.S. troops are in Syria and Iraq. Still, there's 1,000 troops. You have support in this proxy war in Ukraine. You have bankrolling the genocide in Gaza. You have participation in the war in Yemen. And all of this going on while they're flirting with regime change in Venezuela. Just absolutely absurd and backward. I think it's not going far enough to say that Trump is continuing the policies of Biden in Gaza. He's doubling down on them and expanding on them and deferring everything to Netanyahu. Completely. And it's not that Biden didn't do that, but Trump is vocally supportive of Netanyahu, the war criminal, the genocidal maniac, as he should go down for fraud and corruption charges that they might not nail him with as long as he keeps all these wars going. That's the truth about Trump, and he boasts about how close he is with Netanyahu while this is all happening. He called him a war hero on Truth Social a few weeks ago, if you aren't disgusted enough.
But that seems to be where he's headed. Again, there is no long-term coherent strategic framework to explain anything. I think what we're dealing with is this predisposition to say, well, I don't like this, I'm going to do this. And everybody around Trump just reinforces it. Sure, go down to Venezuela, boss. Let's make them an object lesson. That'll get everybody on board in the region with what we want. I don't think it will. I think it'll have the opposite effect. It could bring down Colombia, which is very fragile. I think it'll stiffen resistance to us in Mexico. I don't think it'll hurt the drug cartels in the least. So you got to go after the drug cartels. You don't necessarily have to remove the head of state in a country to do that.
Right. No regime change wars for going after the drug cartels. That's the new propaganda angle that they could go with for these stupid entangling of wars, is to take down the drug cartels. That's exactly what we don't want.
Especially since that head of state may not have much to do with any of it. It looks like the generals of the Venezuelan army are the ones cashing in on the drug trade and shipping the drugs that come out of Colombia up to the United States from Venezuela. All of this is more complex and difficult than President Trump imagines. Remember when he was running for office, he said a lot of things, but probably the most ridiculous was, I can end this war between Russia and Ukraine in 24 hours. but I think it encapsulates a very childish, uninformed, infantile view of the world. And unfortunately, that's what we're stuck with. And there are a lot of people, obviously, that love this and applaud it, think everything's just great, but it's not. Things are bad, and they're going to get a lot worse the way we're headed.
Yeah, no matter how much threats and vitriol and secondary tariffs and sanctions are levied by Trump, things are getting worse. The U.S. is getting more embroiled in foreign entanglements, regime change operations, and wars than it had before. Trump hasn't ended a war. You know, Iran has a ceasefire, but Israel is already talking about renewing hostilities against Iran. That hasn't ended. It won't end. Netanyahu will start to clamor about how close Iran is to acquiring a nuke. But Macgregor is right. A lot of Americans don't seem to care one way or the other about Israel or Gaza or what's happening there. I hate that. I do care about it. I do care that people are dying on the bankroll of the U.S. Treasury, that the Fed is printing new money and imposing inflation, a hidden tax on Americans to finance it, that they're plunging us into debt. The debt is now $37 trillion. In part because of financing this madness, not only in Israel, but in Ukraine. But I'll even say this, if your default is that you don't care, why just be fine with bankrolling it? If you don't care, I think the default should be that America should mind its own business, get out of the Middle East. That would be the ultimate extension of the mentality that you don't care about that. If you really are America first and that's your priority over what happens in the Middle East, stop giving Israel resources. Stop bankrolling them, giving them $20 billion last year, maybe on the same pace to reach that this year. The default, if you don't care, should be your own community first, your own state first, your own locale first, your own family and friends first. And that doesn't include bankrolling. So for the people out there that say they don't care, I get it. You know, not everyone does care about this to the same extent that I do or Macgregor does. But in that case, are you willing to push back against absurd payments in sponsorship of what's happening there? I think you should look at what's happening in Gaza and make up your own mind on that. But that's what I'll say. I've made my own mind on it, and I think the Israel first mentality is a plague. Israel first is America last. But let me know what you think down below. Do you agree with me? Do you think anything will stop Gaza's occupation or Israel's occupation of Gaza? Do you think anything will inhibit Trump from continuing to support this at all? And how does this play into U.S. foreign policy in general? What does it mean for the Trump administration and the midterm elections? Let me know in the comments down below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, also subscribe to Judge Napolitano. Really appreciated this interview. Always love those with Colonel Macgregor. He's excellent and very knowledgeable in this field. And please consider becoming a YouTube member. If you click the join button below, you can help support the channel. And in return, I'll give you access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.